Everyone for joining, and welcome to this week's IVI Coffee and Talk. We're delighted to have Douglas Cirqueira here. So I'm going to hand over to him now for his presentation. Thanks, Douglas.
Thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So I will just try to share my screen. Just a moment. I hope you can see my screen well.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So yes, as Grace said, I'm currently doing my PhD actually in DCU, but I also have Marcus, Professor Marcus, as my co-supervisor from IVI and Maynooth University. So we have been working, of course, on this project together as well. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is the case of explainable AI-powered processes in fraud detection and retail, which are the domains in which I'm working on. But of course, it's also important to start with some conceptualization on what is explainable and trustworthy AI. And this is one of the definitions which I really like, which says that an explainable or trustworthy AI would be an AI technology which users can deploy, develop, and use with confidence and trust. But actually, why is it important to use or to talk about trustworthy AI? Because we have also seen cases where AI can also backfire, or it can also be harmful. So how do we prevent that? What we need to do in order to avoid those situations? And that was one of the motivations for the EU Commission to establish the guidelines for trustworthy AI. So, for example, we see some of the guidelines related to human agents and oversight. So you need to develop and use a system which you can also control or have the human in the loop. However, we still have some issues to deal with, and one of those is if, for example, those principles are enough for having the user trust in such technologies, or even to integrate explainable AI into existing decision-making processes, which exist for quite a while before even the development of AI solutions. So one of the scenarios which we also see potentials of not only AI, but explainable AI being deployed is customer behavior analytics, which is usually related to, for example, providing users with recommendations or segmenting customers, or even applying machine learning for anomaly detection. So not only to recommend products to users, but also to understand their behavior and protect them against anomalous transactions or amounts being spent on their behalf. However, we still have again the question of, for example, if we are deploying explanations or explanation tools and interfaces for machine learning models being trained on this kind of data like customer transactions, would that be enough for a decision maker to use it and to protect or revise fraudulent cases, anomalous transactions, or even to make sure that the product that's going to be recommended for the customers is the right product? Is this really enough? What I have been investigating is exactly that aspect. So are the existing guidelines and tools, explanation tools, being formed by user needs and processes? Because for the users to trust such systems, it's important to take their perspective into account. So with that, because like the users of such systems, they will actually ask themselves, okay, I have this to use for demand forecasting, for fraud detection, but how can I actually really use this sort of system of predictions into my current decision-making processes? Or can I even trust these that you are providing me with? And that's the question which led me to my current PhD research development, which is to not only develop guidelines or systems, but actually to see explainable AI as a process between people and technology. So what I have been doing is talking to users to understand their requirements, their goals, their tasks, when, for example, they are trying to protect customers against fraudulent activities in digital retail. And also looking to capabilities of explanation tools. So those interfaces that you see, what they can actually provide to customers, to end users as explanations. And when getting those elements together through interviews and systematic literature reviews, I came up with a process which establishes some practices for what explainable AI-powered processes should provide to customers, to end users, or to decision makers. So when we think of deploying AI or explainable AI, it's important to, first of all, not start just providing interfaces or predictions to the user. It's important that he has some idea of what is AI in the first place and what is explainable AI, but also to align predictions or interfaces or tools to their current decision-making scenarios, because you have different types of models, different types of explanation tools, and maybe you don't need to use all of them for particular scenarios and types of alerts, for example, for fraud or anomaly detection. It's also necessary to introduce the data characteristics. So even when you are, for example, in my case, I'm tackling mostly non-AI experts for this process. So they don't have a huge experience in AI or the math behind AI, but they have an experience in their domain. So it could be doctors or it could be decision makers in retail. And they have a lot of knowledge in their domain. And they also need to reflect that on the data that is being used by a machine learning model for providing predictions. It's also necessary to clarify limitations, the weaknesses, and the confidence of the AI, because if a person sees predictions, he or she might think, okay, the AI can do everything or can do miracle, but that's not true, right? So it's important to establish what the AI can do with this particular type of data. It's also interesting to look into how we as human beings understand things and subjects. So, for example, some explanations can provide similarities and outliers analysis, because we as humans like to compare different cases or have examples to understand particular topics. So explanations should also reflect that into this process, as well as providing the influence of data attributes. So in the case of fraud detection, how much is the location or the amount influencing this prediction for this transaction being an anomaly or not, as well as human readable rules. And this is particularly interesting because when talking to experts in fraud detection, I have noticed that they would love to have such rules, because they can use those for reports, for talking to end customers of the bank, for example, for saying why your loan was denied, or why didn't we give you more credit for your, further wishes. So it's important to have this kind of human and easy way to digest explanations, also not only for the decision makers, but for the end subjects of a particular company developing AI products. Then having this interactive aspect, so and this what if analysis, because the idea is that it's important that you don't just see the user as a passive user. It's important that he interacts with those interfaces and explanations. So changing data attributes and seeing how that would impact the prediction in the end. So if I change the location of this transaction or the amount, how much would that give me as how likely it is that this location would change the end prediction of the AI model. So those are some of the elements when we talk about explainable AI powered processes for decision making. And of course, I wanted to finalize with some food for thoughts for discussion. So In summary, it's important to see that Explainable AI is not only about technical or technical systems or machine learning. It's actually about people, processes, and technology together. And we need to think of the accountability aspect of that as well. So who is going to be responsible for developing trustworthy AI or Explainable AI? Is it only the developers, the engineers? How about the product owners, the managers in the company? So it's important to get those all together for this sort of discussion, as well as seeing interesting intersections between disciplines such as HCI for developing friendly user interfaces for Explainable AI, as well as the optimization of explanations, the evaluation of explanations, and even some philosophical perspectives. So it doesn't, what's the point of talking about explainable or trustworthy AI if your company doesn't have ethical processes, or if you don't treat your employees in an ethical manner? So all those aspects are related to this and interesting for discussion. But I wanted to focus today more on the process itself and some of the interfaces we have been developing. And finally, of course, I wanted to end up with a call for the annual IVI Summit 2021, which is going to discuss digital transformation, the path to the future. On November 19th, coming up, registration is already open, so you are invited for this very interesting event. And with that, I finalize my presentation. So I'm open for questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I don't have any questions, Douglas. I thought it was a very nice presentation, and it explained some stuff to me that I didn't know before. So thanks for that.
Sure, Gabriel, thanks. Maybe.
So I was a bit quiet, so for this to let others ask a question, but apparently there are no questions or comments around this. But thanks, Douglas, for presenting this and also bringing the various perspectives on trustworthy AI. I think that's an important part, that basically it's not just a technical concept, it's actually the human, the person, the people, the user is central to this, what trustworthy and to just trustworthiness around this. And what I'm always wondering on this is actually, so when we ask the end users kind of, are they really interested in that? How far they really want to get to it? So when I use a system like whatever, I just assume it works. It does what it should do, and I probably trust more the provider, so the organization, than directly what I see on information on it. So basically, so if it's whatever if I take the financial situation, like if it's my bank, which I was there for the last 20 years, I would trust the organization that they do the right thing. If I call it in that, it's basically then whatever, like a new organization. So something like this. So is it really the kind of the system, the information, or how far do you want to get with this? So these are kind of just a few question marks when I listen to you, what I thought about it, but I certainly don't have an answer. I don't have even an opinion really about it. It's just kind of question marks what I have in my head.
Exactly, Marcus. Thanks for the question and also fruitful thoughts. So exactly, it's still even a challenge to define some of the concepts, within explainable and trustworthy AI. So you also have different definitions, but what you mentioned with this separation of the actors. So you have information, you have the system, you have the organization. That's also an important point when we are thinking of developing systems for explaining AI, because you need to think of who is going to consume that, the end user, because he has particular, you know, different types of or approach or a different background, and you need to take that into account. But also you have to think of the providers. So definitely, if it's a company that the end user knows already for quite a while, it's probably more likely that the person is going to trust that. But still, you need to be careful with this trust aspect, because in the end, it's the person that trusts the system, and the system, just because it's providing explanations, it doesn't mean that it's trustworthy, right? You need to consider other elements. If, for example, it's really robust, accurate. So again, you have different approaches for evaluating the system, and you need to take into account not only the fact that the user says that he trusts the system, but that the system is really working well and doing what it should do. So again, you need to have this holistic view with the actors, but also with the process. How is this system being used and for what? And also take into account these quantitative variables and technical metrics for making sure that the system is going to be working on the way it should work.
Yeah, no, and I probably agree with you on this, that there are so many factors on this. And it's probably also because, so why now, basically, kind of why is it suddenly such an important topic? Because probably trust and accuracy and the right thing was probably also a few years ago, but maybe now it became because the complexity of decision making and the algorithms itself and what actually the system does, in particular if we move more and more into automated processes and decision making, it becomes really important to at least trust and building that trustworthiness, because it's so complex that you can't even you can't kind of understand all of the dependencies around it. So probably that's why it's so important, or got more important now.
Yeah, and definitely, and also because of the regulations, right? So it's important that companies dealing with customer data are able to explain their decisions for credit, or even in healthcare. That's very crucial to understand the outcome of models for defining what kind of treatment, for example, a patient would get or not. So yes, it has to do with the complexity of the data, of the machine learning models nowadays, but also of the way we use those systems, right? And for the types of decisions that we are doing, we're making with those systems. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Douglas.
Yep.
The others are probably busy with drinking coffee, but so.
No, we've been. I can say something. We have been discussing this a lot, so that I want to really to give floor to others, because we have been already discussing this, and we can discuss forever, and it's always interesting. And thanks, Douglas, to bring shed some lights on these different aspects. We've been discussing this on the healthcare environment, but it can apply to any environment. And while you were talking and discussing also with Marcus, and also somehow referring to what I was saying last time about patient empowerment, also is important. And in order to have a patient to understand, or even a medical professional who really understand the information in order to better to deal with AI systems. And what I remember that I said, and I want to ask you, if somehow we find a way, because if a patient, for example, just goes to the doctor and tells the doctor the symptoms, and doesn't really care about what he really has in terms of conditions, so that he will not really be interested to understand how the AI system works. He will just take that and use, because he's a user that just even the doctor is a black box for him, because he goes to the doctor, just tell his symptoms and wants to have the drugs that solve the problem. So that is not really a shift of behavior on that sense. And what I was seeing that maybe if can we apply kind of a soft way of having people to deal with AI, to play with AI, with us, so that it becomes a kind of a trustworthiness, becomes a natural process. On one end, of course, we need to explain AI, to explain the decision, to explain the algorithm. But of course, if people are not don't have the skills, it's not so easy to have them to understand, the results and the information, etc. So, and we discussed this, so that is it possible to find a kind of a trade-off of one end, of course, you provide information, you provide explainability and explanations and this kind of thing toward the user, but then you kind of facilitate the user in playing. Of course, when you talk about fraud, when you talk about decision about health of people, sometimes it's difficult, but even in those cases, maybe creating a soft approach where people start to maybe to deal with the easiest part, with the nicest part, with the most playing part of the AI, and they can trust little by little. They become more used and they trust AI more, and then they can then accomplish the more difficult task. Would be something like that. This approach, I don't know, and again, it's just food for thought and discussion how this could work. But to me, this could be a kind of a trade-off and a soft way approach to AI that still maybe reaches the objective on the long run, but at least makes people not to run away, but to still starting to play and to deal with AI maybe in a comfortable way. What do you think about it?
Yeah, thanks, Marco. Very interesting what you said, and I totally agree on this aspect of the soft explanations, or how to make it friendly to the patient, for example. So because I was actually dealing very much with a very similar situation. So when you look into fraud experts or analysts, they, as I said, they are not AI experts, but they would like to use AI and to understand AI for their particular scenario. So the patient, it's the same. Like you give a diagnostic, but you don't need to explain all the elements or the numbers related to, for example, blood pressure, or very specific details which only doctors need to know. So I think the key for this sort of how to explain to the patient or to the end user is talking to the user before developing such models or such interfaces, because we need to understand how they would like to understand AI and what they need actually to understand AI, because there's always a trade-off. So if you provide a lot of information or a very populated interface, some of the users would like to have that, but others probably they just need one element or one simple chart, or just rules again. They just need to read. They don't need to look into colors, and that's why it's really important to have this sort of requirements elicitation perspective to provide those explanations. And this is actually what I have seen very often now, that people, researchers try to mix a bit of HCI, requirements engineering, and explainable AI research in order to come up with frameworks and guidelines for these. And this process perspective is also interesting, because you get to understand what are the steps in the decision-making processes of doctors, for example, or fraud analysts, and then you try to align what they need in terms of explanations. And I believe that in the case of patients, it's also about talking to them, understanding what they need in terms of information, So you can think of, okay, what kind of model or what kind of interfaces or information they would need. So this is how I see how I see the trends going on in terms of research and disciplines coming together to solve these problems.
Yes, thanks. And I was thinking, for example, what do you think if we could use the same mechanism AI, but for example, instead of self-diagnosing for something that can be, of course, very important for the patient, maybe for the health, some healthy style, some healthy style advices, so that, for example, which food would be better for you, and what you should eat in a healthy way, and so that they would for example, you could use the same mechanism, the same AI system, but would be on something that, and explain something on that. So maybe the user could say, okay, look, try to play a little bit and choose what is the food that is healthier for you, and then you explain why you advised him or her to make one choice rather than another on something that, of course, the food is very important. I'm not saying that eating healthy is not important for our health and well-being in general, but it would be kind of this also soft approach to something that is not maybe very important as a diagnosis, mainly if you have some big problem, and so that it could on something that is collateral but still important, and that then user would trust, and then of course you can move to more important, let's say, things.
Yes, exactly. I think that's actually the way, even thinking of how they would consume these and what kind of channels or interfaces, or even an app, because depending on the channel or the device, it would also open up possibilities for particular types of notifications. And there are even companies already working on these. So how to establish like push notifications on the smartphone, which also provides some sort of explanation, for example, for why is this app telling you that now it's time for getting some sleep, and they give the reason for that. So exactly, I think it's not only the reason for providing explanations is not only because it's nice or it's cool, it's because it's really needed. And you are talking about humans consuming that information, so they need to be convinced, and they need to get those explanations to understand why that way or that treatment would be important.
Thanks very much, Douglas. We can wrap up now because we're almost at 2 o'clock there. Thanks for a really great presentation. As Douglas mentioned, we are having our IVI Summit next week, so there won't be any coffee and talk taking place next week. But you can register at www.ivi.ie/summit2021. Please also share with any members of your network who you think would be interested in attending. And our next Coffee and Talk taking place the week after, on November 25th, will be from Mansour Ahmed. So thanks very much for joining, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks.